Good afternoon. We have a great panel discussion for you about the potential for beneficial reuse of EM materials. Our panelists include industry experts. We have Scott Claunch, who's the president of TerraPower Isotopes. We have Harsh Desai, Chief Commercialization Officer for Zeno Power. We have Marcie Haber, Director of Federal Affairs for Oklo. Kirt Marlow, the Executive Director of the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium and Senior Vice President of Boston Government Services. And Ashley Saunders, who's the Chief Program and Sustainability Officer for UCOR. And joining us from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Office is Kristen Ellis, the Associate Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Regulatory and Policy Affairs. We always love saying that title. We always have to comment about that title. So my name is Jennifer Chandler. I'm a member of Piketon Village Council. We're the host community for the Portsmouth gaseous fusion plant in Piketon, Ohio. So to start things off, I would like to ask Kristen, what is EM's approach to identifying and evaluating various materials for potential reuse? And what considerations are taken into account, and how does EM engage with industry and the communities about what materials may be available and how they can be used?
Thank you for that question, Jennifer. And I think this audience in particular is very familiar with what our core mission is, but I did get several questions about what are these other topics we're talking about here. So really looking forward to diving in a little bit more with this group. But just to kind of set this scene from the 10,000-foot level, obviously we're in the mission of doing the environmental cleanup from decades of governmental research, and that's not an easy task by any means. But as we're thinking about maybe new approaches to doing things and changing our mindset from being, okay, this is a waste, now that it's a waste, we have to find a disposal path and we send it on its way. What's been really interesting now, as we are 35 years into the program, is kind of seeing some successes of thinking about it a little bit differently. And maybe it's not calling something a waste, and thinking about it as, is this a material that has a potential future different use? And is that a use that supports some other larger governmental or nationwide needs? And I want to also kind of just give you a little background about the community reuse organizations, which some of you may be familiar with them and some of you maybe not. You might hear them also referred to as the CROs. And that was an authority that was given to DOE in the 1993 NDAA. Actually, it was in 1992 in the 1993 Act. And it gave us some special authorities to create these community reuse organizations where DOE could work directly with local communities and provide assets that we no longer needed, but we were able to provide them to those communities as long as they're used for future economic reuse, and then kind of foster a new kind of set of economic drivers in the communities beyond just EM being there doing cleanup. At the beginning, we started 15 of these, including Mound, Rocky Flats, and Fernald. And I'm sure the number has changed a lot over the years. Oak Ridge is planning to close their community reuse organization, and I know we have lots of conversations with some of the other communities about if this is something, if they don't have one, is this something that they want to look into? But I think the CROs are really there, and you'll hear this in the conversations today, as the catalyst to this next chapter of what the communities look like as we continue to make cleanup decisions and close out our work and turn these over to another future visions for activities. So again, you'll hear a little bit today about maybe some innovative public and private partnerships that we've been able to work out at Oak Ridge and continue to look at ways we can replicate these in other places. But the main takeaway I want you all thinking about is we're a long way from 1989 when this program started. From a technology perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, from a critical materials, from a what does this country need to be focused on from a domestic production. standpoint. And, now EM, as we are existing in our current, core cleanup mission, and of course, the complexity of being in 15 different states and having regulatory agreements in place with other federal agencies or with states, it's not always, we're not always the quickest ship to turn into a new direction, but I think, as we continue to have these novel successes for these types of programs, that'll allow us to look at more of these into the future. So just to give you just a little more intro about the types of things we're talking about, we work with the DOE, or Office of Science Isotope Program, and so also with the Office of Nuclear Energy and NNSA, trying to analyze what our country needs as far as medical isotopes go. Also looking at, are there things that we have in our inventory that may be of potential value for other future use? You'll hear about strontium-90 coming from Oak Ridge. We also have some strontium-90 at Hanford at the Westwood facility. We've had a number of discussions about things like heavy water, as it relates to deuterium needs. Plutonium-244 at Savannah River site, and HALEU, everyone's favorite high-assay, low-enriched uranium. So these are the types of conversations that are kind of starting and continuing more, and looking forward to the discussion today, kind of to dive in a little bit more about some specific projects that we have underway, and talk about what the future looks like there.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So our next question is, we're going to start with Marcie from Oklo. Since Oklo is working with Idaho National Laboratory to use the fuel from its EBR-2 reactor, what makes DOE's materials attractive for reuse? Can you give us a little bit of insight on that?
Sure, yeah, and just for some quick background on Oklo and what our plans are, we're an advanced fission and fuel recycling company. And we have plans to build small, fast reactors and sell the electricity directly to our customers through power purchase agreements, through our unique build, own, and operate model, unique to the nuclear industry. We also have plans to recycle fuel, and we will be starting with the existing fleet, and then eventually in the long term, recycling our own fuel. That's a benefit of fast reactors, is being able to utilize recycled fuel to make clean energy. And our first deployment is at Idaho National Lab. We have a site use permit from the DOE to build there. We also were awarded 5 metric tons of fuel from the EBR-2 fuel, which ran at INL for about 30 years. We have a few other sites announced, and specifically of interest to this audience is in Ohio at the old Portsmouth site. So what's really important about the EBR-2 fuel is we're one of the only companies right now that has fuel for our first reactor, because fuel availability is a big challenge for us and for others in the advanced reactor community. Because we're building fast reactors, we have some options in the fuel we can use. HALEU, as mentioned earlier, is very important for us and what we'll need in the near term. But we also have the ability to use recycled fuel as well. And that's a little bit more of the long game. So we're not picky about where we get it. We only have fuel right now for our first reactor, like I said. So it's been great that we have the ability to use this EBR-2 fuel. Right now, I know DOE is looking at what other material they could make available, and that's something that we are tracking, and hopefully have the ability to use in the future.
All right, are there candidates at the EM sites that Oklo is interested in?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I know that, for example, there's other, EBR-2 was a research and test reactor. There's other research and test reactors out there, that material that we could use. There's material likely at the Savannah River site, and if that could be made into a form that we could use. There's still a lot of questions right now. DOE is working on it through the HALEU availability program, but the form that it's in, the quantity, and then of course the cost. Those are all things that matter. But our machines do have the ability to be helpful here.
Good. All right, so Scott, launch TerraPower Isotopes. What about you? What makes DOE's materials attractive for use?
Hopefully that's on. So good afternoon, everybody. I guess I would start by saying I am super thrilled to be here this week, and thank you to the Office of Environmental Management and our partner Atkins Realis or Isotech. We know them as Isotech out of Oak Ridge. I'm just a humble nuclear pharmacist at the end of the day, and fortunate to be at this conference and to really listen. The work that you do matters, and it matters for patients as well. And we are excited at TerraPower Isotopes because working with our public-private partnership, our desire is to increase actinium-225, which is a very key isotope for targeted alpha therapy, to increase its access globally to treat cancer. And there are between 15 to 20 drug developers across the world right now, and about 60 compounds which span diseases from odd ones called like gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. That's just even hard to say. That's Steve Jobs' cancer, which is in phase 3 with actinium-225. Today. So increasing access to actinium for that cancer, as well as colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, liver cancer. There are about 60 compounds which are in preclinical or phase trials. And so we at TerraPower Isotopes are super excited to be working with the DOE, with Isotech, to bring actinium-225 to market. Actinium is a daughter in the uranium-233 chain. It comes directly from radium-225, which comes from thorium-229. And so with the dispensation campaign, there's this one-time extraction of thorium-229, which gets harvested out of each barrel of uranium-233 before it gets downblended. And that thorium-229 comes to us. And we elevate that thorium into generator systems, and we harvest the actinium on a constant basis. And then we send that to drug developers so that they can do what they do to hopefully cure some of these diseases. So we couldn't be more thrilled to be here. And in fact, within the last 30 days, our actinium, as we've been scaling our project up, has been used clinically in trials with humans. So, and there's just more to do, not just at our site, but we're also standing up other channel partners like Cardinal Health, in the middle of the United States, as well as a partner in Europe, to utilize this material to end cancer. So really thrilled, excited, and thank you for having us here today.
Scott, one more for you. Is there other EM material candidates that you are looking at that you have not yet gotten to access?
That's a great question. I did name the division Isotopes, not isotope. Actinium-225 is a great isotope for therapy. It has all the ideal characteristics. It's got nearly a 10-day half-life, which might seem short, but for those of us in the industry that are pretty used to shuttling a 110-minute half-life product around the nation, 10 days is a luxury. It has 4 alpha decays, which really, we have the ability to destroy the actual cancer cells themselves. When I was in pharmacy school, we would not have thought to use an alpha to treat cancer. But because we have disease vectors that are so specific for the disease itself today, we can deliver these payloads. So actinium, just the half-life, the energy, phenomenal. We understand the chemistry quite a bit, so we can conjugate it onto a disease vector and deliver that payload to the cancer cell. It's very unique, but there are maybe a few other isotopes that we could use clinically. We're on the lookout for them. Radium-223 has been utilized, which is the daughter of actinium-227. We know where that goes. It goes to the bone. That will remain interesting, especially if we can really chelate that to a disease vector. That's challenging right now. There might be one or two others, so we're on the lookout. Lead-212 is interesting, which comes from thorium-228. So there are a few, and we are paying attention.
All right, well, Harsh, we're not leaving you out. I would like to ask you what makes DOE's materials attractive for Zeno power?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. So at ZenoPower, let me tell you a little bit about ZenoPower, and then I can specifically answer that question as well. So at ZenoPower, we build radioisotope power systems. Think of them like nuclear batteries. These are the size of your microwaves and microwave ovens to provide power in austere environments. When you talk about austere, it's space, undersea, and remote terrestrial locations where it is either very hard to get access to power, or it's not possible, or it's just extremely uneconomical. So our idea here is our mission is to really democratize access to power. And by doing so, it allows us to ensure that we provide power and capabilities for national security, scientific research, and commercial applications that allows us to have the American leadership that we continue to have and maintain that leadership as well. And on a personal note, what I will say is that I've been in the nuclear industry for 20 years or so, and most of my career has been on the reactor side of the world. But whenever you talk to someone that is outside of the industry, the question always is, well, what about waste? How many of you have had that question come up? I would expect all the hands to go up, right? That's our industry's Achilles heel. And I'm delighted to be part of an industry that is actually working to address that situation. And by utilizing what is considered waste, for example, strontium-90 at DOE legacy sites here, into something that is an asset that can be used as fuel for these power systems is not only something that helps us reduce the liability of this material for the government, taxpayers, and the communities themselves, but also personally enriching, right? I want to be able to go, have my 2-year-old daughter when she grows up to be able to say, hey, I did something about this thing that everybody talks about as an issue to the nuclear industry. So something that we've found ourselves to be part of, and to kind of transition to talk a little bit about what we have been able to accomplish. So our technology, with our technology, we have 3 contracts, 2 with the Department of Defense and 1 with NASA. And the idea there really is to use this material and use it for beneficial reuse purposes. So we were able to work with Department of Energy, especially Office of Environmental Management, Oak Ridge Environmental Management Site, UCOR, and many, many others to really get us access to what was considered waste product at Oak Ridge's site, something that did not have a direct disposal or disposition pathway. And we were able to disposition that, and by doing so, actually reuse that material and use it for beneficial purposes. So, and to kind of end that there, we're a nuclear company, but we're also in the space world, right? By having access to our technology in space environments, we naturally become part of the space community too. And as many of you know, the space community loves their patches, right? So I'm here wearing this jacket. I'm not cold. It's actually rather warm here, but I'm wearing it because I wear it proudly. I wear our Zeno patch proudly, and I wear our UP500 patch proudly. That is what enabled us to get access to our initial material. And that was in part working with all the partners that we have. And we proudly mention them. If you look around here and come talk to me afterwards, or my colleague Patrick and Kirt, and we can show you all the partners that enabled this to happen. So it's a start of a journey. We're going to use this material to build 10 or so systems and hopefully work with the department to get access to even more material and really get to get to a production level. And then I might add on a personal note, I was heartened by the Secretary's comments yesterday when it was a nice surprise that she mentioned us. But she said, essentially referenced Phoenix and mentioned rising from the ashes. That's really what it is. It's really using material that would have been disposed of underground or some other way and find other values for it. And I think that's really what the nuclear industry and this community brings. is access. How can we use that material for beneficial purposes and make everyone's life better, whether it be isotopes for medical purposes or for energy purposes. So thank you.
Awesome. So Harsh, I'm going to keep you on the hook here for this next one. So public-private partnerships, let's talk about that. Do you have something specific that you can highlight where, a win-win scenario was created and that enabled your capabilities and technologies to move forward?
Sure, happy to do that. I'll kind of borrow on the comments that I just made, right? And I'll start really by this patch, right? If you look at my patch and if you have laser eyes or binoculars, you can zoom in and you can see here the partners right here. This would not be possible without all the partners. And I'll read the partners: Westinghouse, UCOR, Zeno, DOE-EM. And these are the folks that really made this happen. And then, add other folks there too that are not here, but were key essentials like Firewater Associates and others that really made this possible. But, to answer your question, it's really a win-win-win scenario. It's a win for Department of Energy because we get an opportunity to reduce this liability. It's a win for the Department of Defense because we get an opportunity to revitalize radioisotope power systems for national security and scientific exploration, and even commercial applications. And it's a win for Zeno to really think about a public-private partnership to bring in innovation into to bear and commercialize a technology that will hopefully help in many ways.
Very good. Scott, what about you?
Yeah, our public-private partnership is a win-win-win across the board as well. Having the ability to harvest actinium to use in patients for disease is what we're really trying to do. And in getting involved at TerraPower, investing tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars for about 17 pennies, which is, we expect between 40 and 45 grams from a mass standpoint of thorium-229 at the end of the campaign. That's about 17 pennies, right? So not a whole lot of material, and it has an 8,000-year half-life. And so, never lose the thorium, Scott, is the mantra. But so we got involved and invested substantially to really help reinvigorate the program, and in so doing, we believe saved the taxpayers some dollars. But most importantly, we're putting the actinium now to use for patient care and to really hopefully end disease. And thus far, the trials, it's amazing. To give hope to patients who are end of life across several diseases, and they take the actinium-tipped radiopharmaceutical, and their cancer goes away. And nuclear medicine is super cool for a bunch of reasons, but we can find the disease, we can fight it, and then we can follow that patient with time and make sure that disease is actually gone. And so with actinium-labeled products, we can do that. And we wouldn't be able to do that without this partnership that we have with the DOE repurposing this material. So,
thank you. Marcie, can you highlight some benefits of the public-private partnership that Oklo has experienced?
Yeah, the one that I'll highlight, and I did already talk a little bit about this, but our partnership at INL for our first reactor site, our first deployment. Oklo's plan is to get to hundreds of these. They're small reactors. We're starting at 15 megawatt electric in size. We have plans to scale to 50 megawatt electric. So they are on the small side, but we have to start somewhere, and we're starting at INL. And the partnership that we have with them, we're also working with them on R&D when it comes to fuel recycling the technologies. But the ability to have access to that fuel from EBR2 will get us to our first deployment, will get us to that first instance of supplying clean energy to the local community. And that's really important as we, as a country, need to look to decarbonize and also increase how much energy that we have available for customers that are coming online. I'm sure you all have some awareness of the data center boom that is occurring in this country, and they're going to need electricity, they're going to need clean energy, and a lot of it. And Oklo has the ability to supply that for them, but it all starts somewhere, and for us, it is starting at INL.
Very good. Okay, so this next question is for Ashley. Ashley, Oak Ridge has had some significant success in identifying and reusing the materials. What contributed to that, and what lessons can be learned?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So first, I just want to kind of echo something that Kristen said. Even though we're here really talking about some of these amazing outcomes and beneficial reuse of formerly no path to disposition waste streams, I really think that fundamentally the EM program is a reuse program. So it's not just, hey, we've got a really challenging waste stream, how can we reuse it? It's what we do day in and day out. It's part of our waste hierarchy, the evaluation that we make every day as we're dispositioning our waste, and even up to the federal land that we reuse as a program. So I think it's really kind of in the DNA of who we are as a mission and as a program. But as it relates specifically to the exciting partnership that UCOR and DOE had with Zeno Power for the reuse of the strontium-90, I'll give you a little bit of kind of my perspective of why this is such a great risk reduction example of risk reduction as well as partnerships. And Hirsch already talked a little bit about that. I'm sure he can shed more light on the exciting progress of their project. But this was a waste stream, you may have heard of it, called BUP 500, a waste package that had been in safe interim storage at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for nearly 40 years as the activity decayed and awaiting future disposition. But that disposition was not expected to take place for another 30 years. The package had decayed to about 500,000 curies. That's about half of where it was when it first went into storage. But this partnership enabled the Oak Ridge Reservation to reduce its risk and liability by 500 curies, 30 years ahead of when it was scheduled to do so. It also really saves all of us taxpayers money in the surveillance and eventual disposal that would have had to have taken place with this waste stream, as well as some of the rehandling that may have had to go on. As we're cleaning up around this package physically at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, we would have perhaps had to handle it and relocate it more than once. So, all of that is suboptimal to the way that we like to manage waste. So again, this was a great risk reduction story, but could not have been possible without the partnerships, and Hirsch mentioned several of them, but local OREM, EM headquarters, EM 3 and 4, multiple national labs, other federal programs, other DOE offices, NASA, DOD. We also had small businesses involved. We had multiple states because of the transportation that this waste package had to go through. But I do want to just call out the leadership that Jay Mullis showed throughout this process. He kind of took this on as his, something personal that he really wanted to see this program accomplish, the disposition of this waste stream. And I saw him really invest a lot of time and energy into that. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that from the first conversation we had about this until the truck left Oak Ridge was about a year. And I think that's a pretty remarkable action window to get this done in. So it's a really exciting story from a number of different facets.
Awesome. All right, so this next question is for Kirt. Kirt, in your experience engaging with the community as the executive director of the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium, is there still a concern that reused materials will generate public safety concerns? And if so, how can DOE and companies work to best address those concerns and demonstrate that these materials are and can be used safely?
Thanks, Jennifer. I think one of the topics that I'm probably most passionate about in the nuclear industry is the beneficial reuse of material. Many of us in the industry have spent a lot of time answering the question when friends and colleagues ask us the question and say, well, why are we just not recycling the fuel? I've heard that France does that. I heard that Korea does that. I heard that everyone else is doing that. How did we miss the boat along the way? Ironically, we were the original reprocessors of fuel, right? And we were actually really good at it. And so the irony that we've made policy decisions along the way that have put us in a situation where we currently don't recycle that fuel and find uses for it. I think Oklo is a great example of finding a really great opportunity that fell outside of the standard commercial fuel and has really taken advantage of that opportunity. But that is certainly the path forward. And with the Russian ban on imported uranium, we now have, an even bigger press at this point to make good decisions on how we transfer fuel within the complex. Later this year, we'll have a meeting at the main Yankee facility that has currently got their ISFISI sitting there with all of their used fuel. And so, the question of do we know how to correctly transport that fuel? Of course we do. We've been doing it for a very long time. Do we know how to engage the public? I don't think we do. I think we have a long history of proving that we're not really good at engaging the public on risk-based understanding. And so I think we've slowly gained more and more trust back. I think we talked a little bit yesterday about the improved transparency from the Department of Energy and what a great job they've done with meetings like this, where we engage the community, we engage elected officials, and we do a good job of that. We have a lot of trust to win back on this concept of recycling material. We did it historically, probably not in the correct way, and so we have a long ways to go of helping the community understand that we understand how to do this safely. And as many have mentioned here, that the opportunity to reduce the waste, that there are really better options than to put it into the side of the mountain or into a hole into the ground. And so, as many of us here are advocates among our communities, and the opportunity to make some policy changes to help the Department of Energy understand how to transfer material between offices. And very much like the opportunity that Oklo had, Oklo is not just reusing material, they're also reusing a facility as well. And so that opportunity to take advantage of existing facilities, existing know-how, to be able to generate new fuel for advanced reactors, really a huge opportunity. And so I think the onus really relies with all of us to advocate to our communities that we do understand how to do this correctly. It is the best pathway forward for beneficial reuse of material, whether that's fuel or isotopes or other waste streams that we can reuse.
Okay, well, kind of sticking with the theme of benefits to the local communities, I'm going to give this right back to you after I ask this, and then I also would invite anyone who would have something to add to offer that as well. But how can EM companies and the local communities work together so that the local communities that are hosting the EM sites receive the maximum economic benefits? Do you have any examples of where the community is really getting an economic benefit from a reuse project?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not a zero-sum game. So I think in historically, I think a lot of the communities have kind of competed for particular projects. If they're not going to do it at Oak Ridge, then they're going to do it in Idaho, or they're going to do it in Aiken. I think the bottom line is there is plenty of material to go around, and there are plenty of opportunities. And whether that's companies like Zeno's and TerraPower or Curio or Oklo, there are so many companies who are eager to take advantage of this. There now is a market for the material. And so I think the opportunity for the economic development folks within the community or the elected officials to attract that. And that means, again, working with Department of Energy. That means engaging on the policy side. That means that if I want to recycle used fuel in Idaho, I need to make some changes to the settlement agreement between the state of Idaho and the national laboratory. And that requires a lot of public engagement. And so, you can't just raise your hand and say, bring your project here. I think you also have to engage on the policy side. You have to engage on the elected official side. And if you really want to drive some of those projects to your communities, you're going to have to make sure that you have a state and a legislature and a set of elected officials that understand the risks, they understand the benefits, they understand the costs, they understand the ROI of those projects. So I think that's the real opportunity, and I think that's the magic of this meeting, is such a unique space where we have both the federal governments, the commercial private companies, as well as the communities themselves. So I think there really are huge opportunities for the reuse. Like I said, I think we are now existing in a market that is really friendly to finding, whether it's isotopes or fuel. We are really in need of material, and there are some good economic arguments for those projects to take place.
Very good. I'd like to also ask this question of Ashley and benefits of the community from your projects.
Yeah, thanks so much. So the approach that I kind of want to walk through today is the economic benefit of the federal land reuse that's taken place specifically in Oak Ridge. We're not talking about the closure of ETTP, we're talking about the reinvigoration of that site at the Heritage Center. So as this land has been cleaned up, it's being put back into the hands of the community for beneficial reuse. Kristen talked about the community reuse organizations. The one that we have in Oak Ridge is of East Tennessee, but that's just a tremendous amount of private investment that can now come into the area. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that have already been committed, and you know the names, you know the projects. Orano just announced a multi-billion-dollar project on a formal federal footprint. Sorry, that's a little bit of a tongue twister. But so there, just from a strict economic development standpoint, there's a tremendous economic enhancement to our community, but there are also beneficial reuse that takes place in the form of conservation, natural asset development, historic preservation, so things that really add benefit to the community above and beyond the risk reduction that our programs are responsible for.
Yeah, they're really important.
I think you've got some interest on this side of the table for jumping in.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, I'll start off. And to take Ashley's example and kind of run with it, and I think it was Congressman Fleischman or maybe someone else said it earlier in the week that, East Tennessee is now kind of the Silicon Valley for nuclear. And I think that's a perfect example of how, when we can get alignment among all of the interests and find a way to kind of change that conversation. You think about some of the titles that were used at some of our sites back in the day. Oh, that's the bomb plant, or that's whatever. And, reframing that to think about what are the specific assets and resources that we have that now today in 2024 and beyond are really unique for some of our regions. And you think about the infrastructure that was already put in place at many of these sites. You think about new development that, can't find greenfield opportunities to develop. And so, maybe some of our brownfield resources suddenly become a lot more attractive. And when we can get alignment among all of the decision makers and, recognizing this vision of what you assumed about what this activity was from back in the Cold War, and kind of reframe that to what the future is for the regions, I think it's a really powerful conversation. And again, I'll just throw a quick caveat in there, hearkening back to the Secretary's comments about we're here from the government and we're here to help. Of course, as we hear about these opportunities, we need to be really thoughtful too about pre-existing regulatory agreements that may have been put in place and milestones and a path that we may already be on. It's not, going to be a quick switch and okay, now we're doing this. Obviously, we don't move at the speed of a startup, and so just the patience of being able to work through some of those things. But I think as we continue to have successes like we've had at Oak Ridge, we can build on those lessons and replicate those successes into the future.
I was going to add a couple of things here. From our standpoint, as a private entity, look, we're very good at building technologies. We're not necessarily good at talking to people or understanding their needs and desires as well. One of the things that we've learned really well, whether it's working in Tennessee or out in Tri-Cities area, right? Whether it's ETech or or TRIDAC, there are a lot of different organizations, particularly as part of ECA, that have really helped us understand the communities that we want to be serving in. And that's really a starting point for a credibility building. For us to actually go into a community that has been impacted by radiological materials, it's really hard to come in and say, oh yeah, I want to set up a shop here and continue to invest more into nuclear here. That's a hard message to sell, but it starts with actually having community or reuse organizations come in and help us with that. Look, ultimately, we want to be a good environmental steward as well, right? We not only want to reduce this material, but we want to use it in the right way so that we're not taking material from here and then putting it over there. That's not the intent here either. So it's really helpful for us to have that credibility and understand the community's concerns and desires as well. And then I might add a couple of things here is workforce development. That is something that is incredibly helpful, especially as many of these communities are transitioning from potentially cleanup mission to clean energy mission. That's really a valuable area that we can engage in. When I think about certainly Oak Ridge area, certainly Tri-Cities area, as they eventually start ramping down their cleanup missions, we want to use that workforce or invest into that workforce so that we can continue to rely upon that. As many of us know, workforce development is a challenge, and it's a huge challenge, whether it's in the nuclear energy industry or cleanup industry or whatever that may be. So we just can't lose sight of that. And that's where reuse organizations have been incredibly helpful. And then the third thing I will just mention is the cleanup to clean energy aspects, which is really looking at reusing federal lands for potential applications. So I know Ashley mentioned that, there are a lot of legacy sites here, and certainly the secretary mentioned it yesterday, but certainly there are a lot of sites that are looking at hosting companies like us. That is where we want to be. Why don't, we don't want to go to a community that doesn't want us. We want to go to a community that wants us and wants to be part of it. So having a community reuse organization understand what that process is it's a daunting task when I have to think about a dedicated radiological facility. Where am I going to get permits from? Whose licensing am I going to have to deal with? Where am I going to hire people from? How am I going to build this stuff? That's a daunting task. By having an organization like community reuse organizations like TriDex and others, it's really valuable to help us think through those things because that's exactly what they have done. It really helps us synergize and become and get to deploying our technology faster and meeting the needs of our customers. Hopefully that helps.
Very good. Scott, would you like to add anything to that as well?
I think Harsh just did a great job. I would echo, as TerraPower, I would echo all of these things. For us, we're trying to solve an access issue to the isotope, but in my opinion, as I think about radiopharmaceuticals in general, every problem is access. And so access to talent, what we found out in our journey thus far with actinium-225 and thorium-229, handling it every day, almost every week for sure, with an 8,000-year half-life. This industry, the nuclear medicine industry, we're not used to that yet. And so to the extent that you have talent that is used to handling this type of material with inhalation and ingestion hazards that are just tremendously low, having access to that talent is a key differentiator. The industry's moving so fast. The evolution of nuclear medicine, being able to utilize this isotope to treat disease, we couldn't go fast enough. And so it's about speed. And so if you can get access to that talent, it matters. And these sites where this legacy material exists, that's where the talent is. And so I couldn't agree more with Harsh in his comment.
All right. Marcie, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Harsh was saying specifically, and I actually wanted to provide an example of this working well. So the Southern Ohio Diversification Initiative, they're in Piketon, Ohio, and they're redeveloping the former DOE site, or part of it. And Oklo has announced that we'll be building 2 of our powerhouses on the old site. And SODI's, they're doing a great job with community engagement. We've participated in different meetings and roundtables that they've held where they've had companies like Oklo and others in the area participate with representatives from different labor groups, politicians and staff across from local, state, and federal. So I just wanted to provide that. That's an example of them doing a really a good job for a community that is aware, has the workforce, has an understanding of the nuclear world since they've been a part of it for decades. And actually next week, Sodai is hosting 2 open houses. Oklo will be participating in that. So they have this consistent presence in the community and having opportunity for members of the community to be present, participate, ask questions, learn more. So I just wanted to provide that example.
Very good. Good. Okay, so this question is really for everybody. So I don't know which side we want to start with, but I'll ask the question and then I'll just point. So we've heard about a lot of the benefits and great opportunities that exist with reusing some of the EM materials. But now let's talk about the challenges. So what are the current challenges toward reusing EM materials, and what can we do to overcome those challenges? And in particular, like to hear a little bit about how EM communicates with NE and NNSA and Office of Science and all the other offices in DOE. So let's start with Kristen, maybe, unless you don't want to.
I can start us off. And I've covered some of these themes already throughout my previous conversations, and that's, you all know how large a program we are in multiple states and multiple, state entities, lots of oversight bodies, all of those activities. And then you mentioned our relationships with the other program offices. They all have their own core mission as well. As we've heard a couple different versions of, this stuff isn't really straightforward to communicate. I agree with Harsh's comment about sending the smartest people out in the room to go talk to the community about something for the first time is maybe not the best idea that we continue to keep doing. And again, helping people understand all the moving parts associated with this. And, when you're in a program that's got such a long life as ours, 35 years in, keeping people up to speed on what's going on a regular basis is a challenge as well. And so I think I'll just stop there. I'm sure this group is more interested in hearing what the other folks think are the challenges of working with DOE or other partners.
All right, we're just going down the line.
Well, I guess I'll start. So I don't want to say challenge. I think it's actually an asset here, which is that it's always challenging to have contracting done. And whether it is, this is generally across the board, right? Whether it's DOD, DOE, whatever it is, I want to give a shout out here, right? I mean, Ashley mentioned from a concept of an idea to actually doing transport of the material was 1 year. So now that included contracting. We did a lot of really innovative things. I want to give shout out to you, Kristen, of course, Jomaris and Rosa Almedi and Julia Schenk and many others at the headquarters organization to work through the contracting piece. And then that's the first piece. But then it's the hard part that comes in, which is coordinate and make it happen. So that's another shout out that you got to give, right? I mean, when needed, EM3, Brenda's OXA office, of course, ORM and Jay and others all just jumped in to help as needed. I think that's a huge asset for this organization, that when there is a fire drill, we all come together and serve a common good. I think there is a huge opportunity. That's an asset you can't, it's understated. Not many organizations can do that and do that well. So there's a shout out there. Now, if you ask about challenges, I'm going to give you at a broader level. As we continue to think about beneficial reuse of this material, whether it's commercial, whether it is for government purposes or whatever that may be, we will need to think about the back end of this too. As we want to certainly reduce the liability, and we're going to use this material, but there's always a need to have a central location or a place where we can store what will be eventually waste or process waste or whatever that may be. So in a commercial world, that becomes very hard, as many of you know, GTCC. So I don't know that I have a solution yet. If I had a magic wand, there's a lot of ways that we can solve this, but we don't. But that is something that we need to slowly but surely crawl ourselves, get to it, and have a real discussion about, is as we start thinking about beneficial reuse of this material, are we making sure that on the back end, when they are done, that we have a place that we can store this safely as well. Companies like us don't want to be in a place where we have this material and then we don't have a pathway to disposing of that too. So it's in a win-win, it's a beneficial scenario for all. Win-win for DOE, win-win for commercial industry, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure we keep people safe as well. So that's one challenge that I will say. I'm not sure we're going to solve it overnight, but it is something that we need to continue to engage. Obviously, DOE has to engage with NRC, agreement states, all the legacy sites, and many others. And I know ECA put out a report about that too. So something that I think would be really valuable as we continue to have conversation.
I guess for us, speed is our largest challenge. So anything that will improve or increase the velocity of getting thorium in the channel to us so that we in turn can utilize that thorium, provide it, our process and that thorium to our channel partners like Cardinal. Anything that affects speed is important to us as the drug developers initiate clinical trials across just a bunch of clinical indications. And so I'm not really aware of challenges per se. The relationship that we have with our partner, which is on site at Oak Ridge, is phenomenal. I mean, there's several examples with that partner where they're deferring retirement because their people are so excited about making a difference, not just with waste, but with patients' lives, that they're like, hey, I'll delay my retirement in order to do that. And so I can't really think of a challenge but just in general, getting the thorium as quickly as possible is our challenge so that we can use it.
All right, Kirt.
Yeah, I would say, many of us come from communities, especially at a cleanup workshop, where we have spent, in some cases, decades talking about getting the waste out of our state. And so this idea of changing that paradigm and saying, well, why would I want to bring nuclear material into my state, right, is a huge paradigm shift. And that includes, all the way up into our state legislators and even, congressmen as well. So, trying to understand, I'll certainly use the example of Idaho of saying, well, on one hand, we have certain amounts of waste that are leaving the state, much of which is going to Carlsbad, New Mexico. But at the same time, we're trying to bring material into the state, whether that's to recycle fuel, to do fuel research, to look at new fuel types. And so, that concept of being able to really help, again, be an advocate and help people understand of why would we want to bring nuclear material into our state for, saving people's lives, for developing advanced reactors, for changing the nuclear energy concept. So I think that's certainly one challenge. I would say just quickly, the other challenge is, the inner office issues of dealing, right? So, EM may own some material that needs to go to NE, NNSA may own some material that needs to go to NE, vice versa, Office of Science. And so, that is a real challenge and can be really a roadblock in some cases for reuse.
Yeah, I echo all the other comments made about with this question. But specifically for us, the access to the material is probably the biggest one for us. And like Kirt just said, that interagency connection is something that where we would see a bigger challenge.
So from the Oak Ridge perspective, the BUT 500 was one of just a handful of current challenging waste streams or no path to disposal waste streams. So we've got a couple different issues that, each one has their own unique challenges. We have policy issues like moratoriums in place for disposal of certain materials, as well as, there just may not be a scaled up technology approach that helps us address these waste streams. So we're, kind of in a wait and see mode as it relates to, a vendor or someone coming with the right technology at the right scale to address this, to help us with either eventual disposition or reuse of that product. But I know there's a lot of people who work on it day in and day out. But some of these things have challenged us for a long time. As it relates to this specific project, the BUT 500, as you can imagine, transportation was one of our biggest challenges. And so we obviously had a lot of coordination between multiple states to transfer this package. We had a non-traditional kind of waste container that required exemptions. And then we also, this may come as a surprise, had a challenge finding a qualified federal driver. So that's just one little nuance to this project. But yeah, a lot of lessons learned from this. I think that could be beneficial for others in the future.
And Ashley, since you mentioned that, I will mention that on our site, specific to this project, one of the things that we did, and we did it right with the help of others, was to think about worst case scenarios, think about contingencies in the event things don't go the way you expect it to be. So in the event you're not able to beneficially reuse this material, how are you going to dispose of that? Where are you going to do it? So there was a lot of support there as well. Certainly DOE headquarters helped. NEC International was a key instrumental partner in making this really happen as well. So I think one of the things that I will say is when potentially put together with a challenge, always think about what's the worst case scenario and work backwards. That really enabled us to address some of the other challenges that came to us at the last minute, but since we had already thought about it, made things a lot easier to execute on the project.
All right. Well, this was a wonderful panel full of great information. And does anyone have any last words, or are we ready to call it a day? I don't think we really have time for a question in the audience. So, but thank you guys for everything that you shared today.